Oh, darlings, gather round your flickering screens, for we're diving into the grimy underbelly of Britain's industrial north, where the steam engines weren't the only things pumping away from 1760 to 1840. Imagine Tinder, but instead of swiping right, you're dodging cholera and clap in a Manchester slum. Horrific? Absolutely. But let's spill the tea like a Regency gossip rag. These practices make today's OnlyFans look like a vicar's tea party. If this scandalous romp through history has your corset in a twist, smash that subscribe button like a Luddite on a loom, and tell me in the comments, where in the world are you tuning in from, and what ungodly hour is it? Midnight in Mumbai or dawn in Dallas? Let's make this a global parlor of impropriety. Ah, my delectable dears, welcome to the soot-choked saga of the UK industrial north, that glorious epoch from 1760 to 1840, when the air was thick with coal dust, the rivers ran black with factory effluent, and the sexual escapades were as twisted as a cotton spindle. We're talking Lancashire, Yorkshire, Manchester, the beating heart of the Industrial Revolution, where mills sprouted like mushrooms after a reign of royal subsidies, and humans were ground finer than the flour in a workhouse gruel. But oh, the horrors beneath the bonnet. If Jane Austen penned the polite parlours of the South, up north it was more like a pamphlet from the Hellfire Club meets a Dickensian fever dream. Sarcasm aside, or rather fully embraced, let's unpack these horrific sexual practices with the wit of a Regency satirist and the irony of a modern meme lord. After all, what's history if not a mirror to our own absurdities? Picture this. The North transforms from pastoral idyll to urban inferno faster than you can say enclosure acts. Peasants flood in from the countryside, Irish immigrants pile on during the potato famines, though those peak a tad later, the groundwork is laid. And suddenly, Manchester's population explodes like a poorly ventilated steam boiler. By 1801, it's over 70,000 souls, crammed into what was once a modest market town. By 1841, nearly 300,000. Slums like Angel Meadow, oh what a misnomer, more like Devil's Playground, become the epicenter of depravity. Houses subdivided into rabbit warrens of rooms, cellars flooded with sewage where families of 10 huddle on straw pallets. Overcrowding? Darling, it was intimate in ways that would make a swingers club blush. Men, women, children, all genders and ages sharing beds, breaths, and bodily fluids in a symphony of snores, coughs, and clandestine couplings. Modern comparison? Think Airbnb gone rogue, but instead of 5-star reviews, you get typhoid and a side of regret. Now, on to the meat, or should I say, the flesh trade. Prostitution wasn't just a side hustle, it was the North's shadow economy, blooming amid the factories like weeds in a coal yard. Women in the mills earned a pittance, maybe 5 to 10 shillings a week for 14-hour days of back-breaking labor, dodging looms that could snag a limb or a life. Men fared slightly better, but not by much, so why not supplement with a spot of night work? As one contemporary pamphleteer might quip, better a harlot's purse than a pauper's grave. By the 1830s, estimates suggest thousands of prostitutes in Manchester alone, with streets like Charter Street and Angel Street boasting brothels in nearly every house. We're not talking glamorous courtesans a la French Revolution. These were desperate souls, often factory girls moonlighting to feed families or escape the drudgery. Horrific? Absolutely. The exploitation was baked in like arsenic in the wallpaper.
Gossip from the era's scandal sheets paints a vivid, vomit-inducing picture. Brothels ranged from upscale houses of accommodation for mill owners and merchants, where a gent could sip port while negotiating terms, to squalid dens where a quick tumble cost a few pence and came with a complimentary dose of the pox. Venereal diseases were the true horror show, rampaging through the population like a biblical plague. Syphilis, gonorrhea, the French disease, as the Brits snidely called it, rotted bodies from the the inside out. No antibiotics, just mercury treatments that made your teeth fall out and your madness bloom. Irony alert. The same industrial barons preaching moral purity in their chapels were often the ones frequenting these establishments, spreading the rot back to their prim wives. Modern parallel? Imagine CEOs railing against vice while secretly funding their mistress's Patreon. Same hypocrisy, different century. But wait, the practices get more twisted. Enter the flagellation brothels, those peculiar parlours where pain met pleasure in a whip-cracking waltz. While more infamous in London's seedy underbelly, the North had its share, whispered about in pamphlets like The Birchen Bouquet or anonymous exposés. Gentlemen, and occasionally ladies of means, paid handsomely to be flogged or to flog in rituals that would make 50 Shades look like a nursery rhyme. Why horrific? Because consent was often a luxury. Many birch mistresses were coerced into the role, their bodies marked not just by lashes, but by the bruises of poverty's grip. And let's not gloss over the violence. Prostitutes faced beatings from pimps, robberies by clients, and the constant threat of scuttlers, those proto-gangsters in brass-tipped clogs who roamed Angel Meadow, luring punters into alleys for a mugging mid-act. One account from the 1840s describes a rough using a prostitute as bait, the mark stripped bare, only to be jumped by her accomplices, left penniless and pantsless in the mud. Charming, isn't it? Like a bad grinder date, but with added cholera risk. Social attitudes added layers of irony. The Regency era, 1811 to 1820, smack in our timeline, was all about excess. Think Beau Brummel and his dandy excesses. Yet the North's evangelicals were already brewing their purity campaigns. Pamphlets decried the fallen women, but rarely the men who toppled them. The Contagious Diseases Acts wouldn't hit until the 1860s, but the groundwork was there, blaming the prostitutes for society's ills while ignoring the economic machine that churned them out. Factory exploitation bled into sexual realms too. Overseers harassing female workers, promising lighter duties for favors. A scandalous report from the 1833 Factory Commission hinted at such abuses, though couched in euphemisms to spare delicate sensibilities. Horrific, yes, but with a witty twist. These were the same mills powering the empire's wealth, so who cared about a bit of collateral carnality? And the domestic horrors. Overcrowded lodgings fostered what we'd now call situationships gone awry. Men and women cohabiting without marriage, shocking, leading to common law unions that dissolved faster than sugar in gin. Domestic violence was rife. One observer in Angel Meadow noted women's screams as common occurrences, with husbands beating wives black and blue over a missing supper or a wandering eye. Irony? The same society that romanticized the family unit turned a blind eye to its fractures. Modern echo? Think reality TV divorces, but without the alimony. In essence, dears, the industrial North's sexual practices were horrific, not for their kinkiness, though there was plenty, but for the grinding exploitation that framed them.
Poverty as aphrodisiac, disease as destiny. Like scrolling through a dating app in a blackout. It was dark, desperate, and dangerously addictive. So, we've barely scratched the soot off this scandalous surface. Next part, we'll delve deeper into the brothel's bizarre rituals and the purity prudes who tried and failed to scrub it clean. Until then, remember, in the game of thrones and moans, the North always wins. Or loses, depending on your prescription. Darlings, if you thought the North's sexual horrors were merely a spot of overcrowded bedding and penny-quick tumbles, brace yourselves. We're plunging into the brothel's bizarre backrooms, where whips cracked louder than factory looms. Picture Eton boys grown into mill masters, craving the birch like a modern exec books a dominatrix on a business trip. Horrific? Utterly. But oh, the irony tastes sweeter than gin in a slum tavern. My delicious deviants, let's linger longer in the labyrinth of the industrial North's carnal chaos, where the brothels weren't mere dens of desperation, but theaters of the truly twisted. We've skimmed the surface of Manchester's Angel Meadow, that ironically angelic abyss dubbed hell upon earth by visitors like Friedrich Engels himself, a warren of cellars and crumbling courts, teeming with 30,000 souls by the 1840s, where prostitution wasn't a choice, but a churn of the capitalist machine. But now, dears, into the velvet, or rather vermin-infested interiors,
the flagellation parlors, the child horrors, the venereal plagues, and the pious prudes who preached purity while the pox partied on. First, those peculiar whipping houses, less common in the gritty north than London's lavish lairs, but whispered about in scandalous pamphlets trickling up from the capital. Flagellation brothels, where gentlemen paid princely sums to be thrashed like naughty schoolboys, bloomed in the Victorian era, though their roots twisted back to Regency excesses. Imagine the same mill owners decrying moral decay in Sunday sermons, sneaking off for a birching that would make a Luddite's flogging seem tame. Why the whip? Some blame public school beatings, Eton and Harrow birching boys into bizarre cravings, or the era's rigid repression, where control-freak captains of industry yearned to surrender. Modern comparison? Like a CEO stress-relieving with BDSM apps, but sans safe words, and with a side of syphilis risk. In the North, such establishments were subtler, hidden in lodging houses or upscale accommodation spots for traveling merchants, but the demand was there. Pamphlets like anonymous exposés hinted at birchen bouquets delivered discreetly amid the cotton dust. Yet the true horror lay not in consensual kink, rare as that was, but in the exploitation baked into every lash. Many mistresses were factory girls coerced by poverty, their bodies commodities in a trade as brutal as the looms. And consent? Darling, in an age where overseers dangled better shifts for favors, it was as flimsy as slum wallpaper. Violence shadowed every vice, pimps beating quotas into flesh, clients turning vicious mid-act, scuttlers luring marks into alleys for robbery, with a flogging thrown in if the mood struck. One 1840s account from Manchester's shadows describes a rough trade, where pain was the point, but payment often skipped, leaving bruises sans bounty.
Deeper still, the venereal vortex. Syphilis and gonorrhea ravaged industrial cities in northern England, spreading rapidly in overcrowded slums, not only through prostitution, but also via clients who carried infections back to their wives and families. Without effective treatments like penicillin, not discovered until the 20th century, the main remedy was mercury, administered as pills, ointments, or rubs. This often caused severe side effects, including tooth loss, gum ulcers, neurological damage, and sometimes death from poisoning. While precise figures are scarce due to underreporting and stigma, venereal diseases were a major concern in rapidly growing cities like Manchester, with brothels and lodging houses acting as key sites of transmission. Contemporaries viewed syphilis, often euphemistically called the French disease, as a symbol of moral decay amid industrial progress, even as economic forces drove many into sex work. Pamphlets and reformers decried prostitution as the great social evil, frequently blaming fallen women while overlooking male demand and the poverty that fueled it. Low factory wages, unemployment, and desperate living conditions in areas like Manchester's Angel Meadow, a notorious slum described by Friedrich Engels as hell upon earth. Families crammed into damp cellars or overcrowded courts, facing disease, malnutrition, and high mortality. Particularly harrowing was the exploitation of young girls. Poverty pushed some as young as 12 or 13 into prostitution, with reports of orphans, runaways, or those from destitute families entering the trade. Brothels sometimes offered premiums for virgins, reflecting demand driven partly by fears of venereal disease. Sexual harassment by factory overseers also blurred lines between work and exploitation. Child prostitution became a major scandal in the 1880s, leading to the age of consent being raised from 13 to 16 in 1885, but vulnerabilities existed earlier. Opposition grew through evangelical and rescue efforts. From the early 19th century, religious groups established refuges and Magdalene asylums to reclaim prostitutes, offering shelter, work, often laundry, and moral instruction. These were noble in intent, but often paternalistic, emphasizing women's moral weakness, excusing male urges, and imposing strict penance. Broader social purity campaigns intensified later in the century, railing against vice, while rarely challenging the industrial system that perpetuated poverty. This hidden epidemic underscored the era's hypocrisies: progress built on human suffering, moral outrage selective in its targets, and vice intertwined with survival in the shadows of the factories.
Darlings, we've danced through the brothel's lash-lit chambers and the venereal vortex swirling beneath, but now we descend to the darkest cellar of this industrial North nightmare, the sexual exploitation of children, intertwined with factory seductions that scarred souls younger than the mills themselves. From 1760 to 1840, as Arkwright's water frames spun fortunes and Watt's engines puffed progress, the human cost was measured in tiny, trembling bodies. Pauper apprentices, mill orphans, and street waifs traded in ways that make modern headlines echo with eerie familiarity. Begin with the factories, those cathedral-like temples of toil, where child labor wasn't a scandal, but the scaffolding of empire. By the 1780s, cotton mills in Lancashire and Yorkshire devoured children like fuel. Parish apprentices shipped north from London workhouses as young as 7 or 8, bound until 21 in contracts more ironclad than marriage vows. Reports from the 1830s, echoing earlier abuses, describe overseers, those strutting petty tyrants with straps and smirks, lording over rooms of 200-plus wee workers, piecing broken threads for 14-hour shifts amid deafening machinery. Exhaustion? Standard. Deformities from stooping? Fashionable. But the sexual horrors lurked in the shadows: overseers dangling favors, lighter tasks, extra bread for compliance. Euphemisms abounded in parliamentary inquiries, but whispers from survivors painted grim pictures. Girls harassed, groped, or worse in isolated spinning rooms. Boys, too, in some accounts. Irony drips like machine oil. The same moral mill owners preaching Sabbath observance turned blind eyes or participated. Modern comparison? Workplace harassment scandals, but with no HR and fatal machinery as backdrop. Deeper into the depravity, the child prostitution trade, blooming in slums like Manchester's Angel Meadow, that hell upon earth, where graves outnumbered residents and vice was the only growth industry. Orphans, runaways, or children pawned by destitute parents flooded the streets. Girls as young as 10 or 12 solicited in courts and cellars, lured with food or gin. Pamphlets and early reform tracts prefiguring the 1885 maiden tribute scandal hinted at virgin sales fetching premiums from gentlemen seeking untouched wares. Brothel keepers scoured factories and lodging houses, recruiting the prettiest or most desperate. One 1830s observer noted girls not yet in their teens parading in gaudy rags, their youth a commodity faster spent than mill wages. Horrific multiplier, venereal diseases ravaged these tiny frames. Syphilis, rotting noses and minds before puberty. Gonorrhea, blinding newborns if mothers survived pregnancy. Treatments? Mercury rubs or fumigations, poisoning as much as pox. Teeth lost, madness gained. And the hypocrisy? Deliciously bitter. Evangelical revivals swept the North, Methodists thundering against sin from chapels built on mill profits, yet child vice persisted unchecked until later reforms. The 1833 Factory Act limited ages, sort of, but enforcement was laughable. Sexual abuses went unmentioned in law until decades hence. Gossip rags decried infant debauchees, blaming parental neglect or Irish immigrants, never the economic grinder churning out vulnerability. Domestic overlaps too. Overcrowded lodgings where families shared single rooms fostered incidental exposures or abuses. Stepfathers, lodgers, desperation blurring boundaries. In some, my prurient parliament, these weren't exotic perversions, but byproducts of progress. Poverty peddling youth, industry infantilizing labor, disease democratizing death.
The North's sexual horrors peaked in its smallest victims, stolen childhoods fueling the empire's looms. Like today's dark web trades, but lit with gas lamps and excused by economics. We've plumbed the child depths, but next we'll unravel gin-soaked streets, scuttler gangs, and the queer undercurrents polite society ignored. Until then, darlings, toast to innocence lost. History's youngest ghosts still haunt the mills.
In Angel Meadows' black heart, these threads tangled. Overcrowded lodgings fostering incidental incest, whispered horrors of families in one room, domestic brutality over wandering eyes, and prostitution as survival. One contemporary observer noted screams as commonplace, wives beaten for suspected infidelity while husbands sowed wild oats in brothels. The Contagious Diseases Acts loomed later, 1860s, but seeds were sown, blaming victims, regulating women alone. Ultimately, my gossips, these practices horrified not for exoticity, but exploitation. The industrial North's sexual sphere a mirror to its soul, progress on blood, sweat, and semen. Poverty the ultimate aphrodisiac, disease the equalizer, hypocrisy the perfume masking the rot. Like doom-scrolling depraved subreddits today, but with fatal consequences and no block button. We've whipped through the brothel's darkest delights, but next we'll expose the child trades and factory seductions that truly scarred the North's soul. Until then, darlings, spare a thought for those who paid in flesh what we now swipe away. History's kinks are the cruelest. Oh, my scandalized sweets, if whips and pocks were merely the foreplay, prepare for the true abyss. The industrial North's trade in children's innocence, where factory floors doubled as seduction stages, and slums peddled youth like cotton bales. Think Epstein's Island, but powered by steam and sanctified by sermons. Horrific? Beyond words. Yet here we are, gossiping like it's 1830.